Bing bong. I am live with another edition of the State of Bitcoin podcast. And for all of those listening on any podcasting 2.0 apps such as Fountain, I really appreciate the boosts. I do read them all the time and look at people streaming me stats, and I try to return the favor. So I do really appreciate it. There was a boost left, but no comment on the last episode. So shout out to Fluid Track for giving me the boost on the last episode with Muzz. Mike Jarmusch, managing partner of Lightning Ventures. So we talked about venture capitalists and all the kind of trials and tribulations they're going through right now in this difficult macroeconomic time, especially as a Bitcoin-only VC. And then I'd like to shout out my sponsor, Codl.co. That's CODL.co. They have the best punch plates in the game. You can order them off their website and they'll get them directly shipped to you. You can use promo code Green Candle. So get your Bitcoin off exchanges. Use a punch plate to store those seed phrases and buy it from Codl.co. I'm helping you save 10%. And you can use that 10% to stack more sats. So what do you have to lose there? Take it off an exchange and use a punch plate to store those seed phrases. Store it very, very sound and securely. And lastly, if you're listening to this on YouTube or anywhere you get podcasts, please share and subscribe to everything I got going on. I really appreciate the support to the show. It helps me bring on a lot of great guests. All right, that was a mouthful, but I do have a very special guest waiting. I got Aleks Svetski. He's author to the Uncommunist Manifesto, Timeless Bitcoin, host of the Wake Up podcast, and overall just a great ambassador for a Bitcoin space. So Aleks, how are you doing today?
Good, brother. Thank you for having me on, man. I'm looking forward to this chat.
Of course. Yeah, me too. So, I've heard you speak on various occasions and seen you kind of all over the space. But for those who might not know anything about you, why don't you give us a little bit on your background and we'll take it from there.
Cool, man. I think most people know me from sort of my Bitcoin content stuff. So whether it's like abusing people on Twitter or, the articles or the Bitcoin Times or the Uncommunist Manifesto or any of those sorts of things. But, my personal history has been more entrepreneurial. I dropped out of university when I was sort of a year and a half, 2 years in, and I went on, a business building spree. Half successful, half not so successful, had my fair share of blow-ups and all sorts of stuff. And the sort of my foray into the Bitcoin space was the world's first dollar cost averaging app. So, I remember in 2017, basically putting together the first Bitcoin only DCA app in the world, and really one of the only Bitcoin only companies out there. Like, people were laughing at me. They're like, "Bro, are you doing an ICO?" And no. And it was a really strange time, but I'm glad to see sort of here we are 5 years later, or almost 6 years later, with not only Bitcoin only companies out there, but Bitcoin only VCs and an entire network of that sort of stuff having emerged. So yeah, these days, doing, I spent 2022 doing mostly writing, and now I'm low key in stealth working on something new, but I can't talk about it yet. It's going to take me another 6 months before I talk about it. But yeah, man, it's a bit about me.
Yeah, and that's great stuff. So, all through this, I've gone through entrepreneurship and found Bitcoin and everything like that. But, what really interests me about you is it seems like you're kind of, your writing is more on the, I guess, outskirts of Bitcoin. It's not necessarily like on the, the tech or something like that. It's kind of on, what the hard money principles and changing the money can really do for society and kind of like, the downfall that we're currently in. So, what kind of brought you to, I guess, that space on Bitcoin instead of going maybe down, the mining or the Lightning Network or those kind of rabbit holes?
Yeah, I think I'm just more, I have a predisposition for the bigger questions instead of the details. And, when you sort of look at, and this is not to diminish from what, Lightning Network is, or, mining is, or, the trading and the price and all that sort of stuff. Everything is relevant, but sort of, my interest is always, okay, so what does all of that mean, right? And where's all of that leading? And yeah, I've always, the allure to large questions and big topics has always been strong for me ever since a young age. Like I was always interested in philosophy. I was always interested in um, theology. I was always interested in that kind of stuff. And yeah, like finding Bitcoin for me was quite unique because it seemed to not only like blend a lot of these things in one place, but you could find a lot of these things individually in Bitcoin as well. So it's kind of like this, Bitcoin kind of reflected whatever you threw at it, right? And you could find Bitcoin in everything. And yeah, it was I guess that's the flavor that most attracted me.
Yeah, so let's start there then, because it's kind of like a, philosophical thing that we're going through when it comes to Bitcoin, and it's all kind of wrapped around, the degradation of, the United States. It seems like, the fiat kind of Ponzi is kind of running to an end, and it kind of all revolves around the money. So, I guess like, around the Bitcoin space, it's kind of been popularized, like what the fuck happened in 1971 and that kind of
Yep.
stuff. But, I guess this all kind of the degradation of society kind of started. Do you think it was 1971, or do you think that there, maybe some other factors that kind of led to where we're at today?
Oh, many other factors. It's like it's one of those questions. It's like if 1971 is so important, what led to 1971, right? And then sort of someone will say, oh yeah, World War II, and it's like, okay, so what led to that? World War One. What led to that? 1913 and the central bank. It's like, okay, so what the hell led to that? And you sort of can keep going. It's like turtles all the way down, right? My sort of sense is that a bunch of wheels started to fall off the bandwagon kind of in the mid to late Enlightenment sort of age. So, I always pinpoint the French Revolution actually as something where a bunch of hierarchical things got overturned and a bunch of really stupid ideas started being, espoused. But, one could also argue that that time had come because a lot of that, era was a little bit, overindulgent. It was weak. Like Louis XVI was a pussy in comparison to Louis XIV, right? So had Louis XIV been around, he would have like quelled the rebellion very very quickly. But he didn't, and he wasn't, and you sort of saw the whole patriarchy sort of fall apart. And there's also mega political factors associated here too. It was a time in which centralization and you had sort of the rise of industrialization, and it made sense to centralize, and there was strength in sort of numbers, right? And if you were on the right side of that trend, you became extraordinarily rich, powerful, large, etc., etc. So it's in many ways, like if you take a really really long view of things, this is just something that humans had to go through. And the decisions made along the way were sort of dependent on the decisions that came before it. And we sort of found our way here. And that's not to sort of defend 1913 or World War One, two, or 1971 or anything. Like we have at every single point in time a better choice to make. But as like I said this to, I think I was on a podcast with Valerie or something like that. We were talking about masculinity, etc. But so a lot of the the last wave of really strong based men sort of got killed off in World War One. And then their kids were sort of still like that. And then the strongest and best of them went to World War Two, and then they got wiped out. And then we sort of had a whole wave of multi-generational feminism sort of rise up from that. And you have the the weak men stage of the hop cycle, right? Creating bad times. So yeah, it's always hard to pinpoint. History is a big mishmash, and sometimes what's served in front of you, you sort of get the hard route or the easy route, and depending on who's in a position to make the choices, maybe the easier route's taken that has a longer term consequence that is not felt by them. And maybe all of that shit is just catching up with us now. And it's up to us, I guess, our generation to buck that trend, hopefully.
Yeah, and it's interesting you kind of say that because, it seems like starting in 2020-ish time is maybe when I really started to notice, maybe people kind of describe the more feminine men in like the 2010s to 2020 time. But I think like during COVID, we really started to see the shift, right? We got the pronouns, the they, thems, and all that kind
Hmm.
of jazz kind of going through there. So, I guess as like Bitcoiners are kind of going and there's this, I guess, like masculine crisis. Like it's not good to be a masculine man anymore. And people kind of are, you know, I guess that's looked down upon in society. So, as we're kind of getting down this rabbit hole or, this bad path, how can Bitcoiners like help just revert the trend as it's kind of like looked down on in society? Like, how do we kind of, I guess, flip the script and get back to, maybe the traditional family values and the traditional, the man and woman relationship?
And if I had to sum it up, I'd say by winning, right? So seriously, like nobody follows losers and nobody's inspired by a loser. And I think, what Bitcoiners need to do is get better at fucking winning. And that's not to say we're not winning. A lot of the time Bitcoiners are winning, which is fantastic. And really, like for me, it just boils down to be the change you want to see in the world, right? So in and amongst your peer group, your community, your family, all that sort of shit, you should be the winner. You should be the one that is inspiring others to want to be like you. Being like, this is why a lot of the libertarians, and this is, I understand this is a gross generalization. This isn't all libertarians, but a big bunch of them are like fat slobs who are like, yeah, bro, it's okay. I'm free to like smoke weed and get fat and do whatever I want. It's like, it's freedom, right? It's like, well, that's, just because there's no bad in it. Like if you can make the argument that there's no bad in it, doesn't mean that there's no good in it, right? So hold on, let me rephrase that. Just because you can make the arguments like where's the harm in it, like if I'm taking this shit myself, it doesn't sort of negate the fact that you haven't answered the question of where's the good in it, right? So that's sort of the premise there. So I honestly think the answer is you should be a model for people to want to be like you. And as I said, whether it's your peers, family, community, or whatever. And when I say should, like that's assuming you want to reflect the change that you want to see in the world. If you just want to be a hypocrite and say, the world's got to be better and all that sort of shit, but you don't be better yourself, then, don't complain when the world's not better, right? So that's it. Like, fix your own shit first, like Jordan Peterson 101, right? Clean your room, like sort yourself out first, and then inspire others through your behavior, through your posture, through your through how you show up to want to emulate that. That's always the answer. It's always been the answer.
Yeah, it's kind of like lead by example, right? And I think when it comes down to
Literally.
there's been a recent article that's coming out that's just kind of come to my mind as we've seen it, and it was from a CNBC, so classic news media outlet, but it said that people who put they them on their on their resumes are less likely to be hired than somebody who doesn't even put their pronouns or anything like that. So I think
That's hilarious.
yeah. So I think like, the national news media outlets that have been kind of feeding into this narrative are now kind of changing the course on it. And so do you think that that's going to be kind of a shift in the next couple of years, as we've seen kind of almost a dramatic shift one way, that we'll almost kind of see it, a dramatic shift kind of back the other way, where it's like, hey, being the masculine jock kind of mindset is going to be more cool, where now before it was kind of looked down upon?
I don't know, man. Trends are tricky things, like that. That may well happen. I don't know. Hmm. I don't want to just give you like a stock standard answer here. I want to sort of think it through, because like there is a groundswell of that sort of stuff happening, right? Like particularly with Elon taking over Twitter and stuff like that. The discourse has changed. There's more and more people who, quote unquote, like have realized that everything was a scam. Scott Adams is like one of those classic examples, right? And there's been a palpable shift. does that mean that the pendulum does swing entirely that way? I don't know. Maybe on a in a broader historical sense, but I don't think that that's sort of happening anytime soon. I think there's just way too many woke monkeys out there. But there's clearly been some sort of shift in that. My feeling though is that maybe we're a little bit biased because of how echo chambers form inside Twitter, for example. So I don't know how real it is.
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying, and I 100% agree. It is tough to tell, but just from anecdotal perspective, I'm here in Florida, so obviously a lot of people kind of flocked down here during the COVID-19 pandemic and everything because it stayed open, and it was previously kind of known as a little bit of a swing state, right? Whether it be blue or red, people didn't really know election to election time, and then this past election, especially the midterms, it flooded red. So it seems like a lot of people who kind of had that mindset, maybe floated down this way to Florida. And, from that, I've kind of noticed, maybe a shift in the friends that I'm making down here where, I grew up in Austin, which is typically the other side of the coin, where, a lot of people are just kind of viewing things like, hey, this is kind of messed up. And they're the pronoun usage and other things like that isn't exactly prevalent around here either. So, that's where it kind of makes me feel like, all right, well, maybe it's just because I'm surrounding myself with Bitcoiners and with, other people kind of the like mindset. But, just for me personally, I do see somewhat of a shift in that. But, when it comes to like working in a normal fiat job, I do see the other side of the coin too, where, they're worried about, not offending people or not saying the wrong word or not saying the right, making sure everybody feels inclusive and other things like that. But I think, overall, where we might see a little bit of a shift as the economic times kind of, get a little bit harder, especially on companies where they're going to start laying off a lot of these, useless jobs, the inclusion jobs, that kind of stuff, making sure everything's diverse and instead hire the best candidates. And so, I think that all kind of revolves around money because, when it comes to money and there's easy access to capital, kind of to revert it back to Bitcoin and like the interest rates and other things like that, dumb ideas don't die as easily when money's easy to come by. In
Totally.
fact, they stay along a lot longer. So I think, as we're kind of getting along to more Bitcoin adoption, we're getting, interest rates rise and other things like that. And companies are kind of struggling. We're going to see kind of, I know, in my opinion, a little bit of a reversion back to, maybe not fully back to the pre-pronoun days, but we're going to see that become less and less common, I think, over time. Now, do those voices that were already kind of loud still get louder? Maybe, I don't know, but I think that there's going to be less of a spot for them maybe in overall society, and it'll be more of, I guess, a reversion back to, kind of the normal, not normal, but I guess historical kind of male-female dynamic.
Man, I can only hope you're right. My concern is that we're in the calm before the storm, like, in sort of like a correction of that shitty trend. And I hope I'm wrong. I hope you're right.
Yeah, I mean,
Because
maybe I'm just a little bit optimistic in that sense, but we shall see. I mean, I guess it's going to be an interesting next few years. But I want to dive
Indeed.
into the Uncommunist Manifesto because, there's obviously, a bunch of principles of communism, and you've kind of lined out that, I'll let you give the spiel, but you've lined out that America essentially has, a lot of those values and kind of runs through that. So, why do you think, I guess, we're shifting a little bit more towards the communism, I guess, dynamic and less towards, I guess, the true capitalism dynamic?
Oh man, I think because I think central controllers, or planners, their reason for instance is to centrally plan something. And it's like you're not going to expect a central planner to put forth a proposal that suggests that people work shit out themselves, because they'd be out of a job, like, or they'd have no meaning to life. So when you look at just the structure of a nation state, and the structure of the relationship between the government and the central bank and everything like that, it seems to lend itself more and more towards like planners and central operators pulling particular levers. And there's an incredible amount of power that comes with being in a position of of those sorts, right? Like being in a high end government position, or being in a head of central banking or something like that. And the system sort of feeds on itself continuously. So the idea that, hey, we should put everyone through public schooling, that was an idea that first sort of came up in the French Revolution, right? And it didn't really happen until the Prussians did it. And to this day, we're still operating in these sort of schooling systems that were designed for the early industrial age. They're completely irrelevant now, but they were useful then, right? And that, like, sort of culture is such a hard thing to shift, right? Culture sort of evolves over generations. It doesn't shift intergenerationally. It shifts intergenerationally. And more importantly than culture, then you sort of have upstream from that is sort of the structures that make up society. And technology and everything like that changes much faster than those things do. So you have this sort of mismatch of timelines, and mismatch of progression and pace and all that sort of stuff, which makes the whole thing messy. So coming back to those sort of 7 points, like in the framework or in the context or in the paradigm of a nation state that has a central banking appendage, a lot of the sort of Marxist pillars, like centralized control of schooling, of money, of of the regulatory apparatus, all that sort of stuff, makes some sort of sense. And then when you educate everyone through that same sort of thinking, you end up having this sort of sausage machine where the people that come into power just sort of keep parroting the same crap over and over again, and they don't fucking know that it's bad until shit hits the fan somewhere. But the problem is, the shit never hits the fan for them because they're not affected by it. Like, the shit hits the fan for everybody else, and they're just completely immune to it. So it's almost hard for them to actually know that what they're doing is wrong. I'm sure a lot of them do, right? But like, for some of them, like, I think they're blissfully ignorant to the fact. And this is me obviously being very kind, right? Like, I can be a lot more vicious in my analysis, but this is sort of where I think we have a series of challenges. So yeah, man, slowly by slowly, step by step, America went from like one of those 10 points now to about 6 or 7 of them. And America is behaving more communist like than what it originally emerged as. So yeah, my hope is that every time we sort of get that, something occurs that fragments it or restructures it or whatever. And I think obviously that's what Bitcoin represents more than anything else.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about the, the personal responsibility and personal, the sovereign individual, that kind of stuff. But, I guess it is a tough question, and I ponder it all the time. Is like, why do you think that has kind of gone to this shift where people kind of are okay with depending on the government, okay with depending on other people? I mean, I get it; it's easier, and it's other things like that, but for me personally, I just always like to I guess be in control. Maybe I'm a control freak or something along those, but I just don't really see, the other side of the coin where it's like, hey, like, I'd rather have the government, or I'd rather have, somebody else kind of taking care of me. Why do you think there's been such a dramatic shift away from just personal responsibility in general?
I mean, you kind of said it in ease, but there's also been an edge in like, you can get further by cooperating with many people. And cooperation is part of like offloading some of that personality, right? So if you wanted to build a business, you would build an organization where you have multiple people, like division of labor, right? Is really, part of it. And this is sort of maybe the ugly side of division of labor, which is, you outsource so many things that you are, completely interdependent with everybody else. And then, maybe the problem here is sort of you've got independence, interdependence, and then dependence. And I'm sort of making up this thing on the fly now is, a functional society is hugely interdependent. It's not one where everyone is independent, right? And obviously not one where everyone is dependent. But if you sort of take that interdependence and then overlay it, in the framework or in the paradigm of a state apparatus, with a central bank, once again, you'll end up getting a lot of the interdependence get taken over by, fewer and fewer entities. So you sort of get a transition from interdependence into dependence, which is where we're at. And it's sort of not noticeable bit by bit. And this is sort of like, no one becomes a communist overnight. Or maybe some people do, depending on how retarded they are. But, a lot of people sort of end up there inch by inch, right? And yeah, I think that's sort of what happened is like at some point it was a good idea to, place this middleman in because it helped, sort things out. And then, he placed another one. And, then all those middlemen got bought out by one, service provider or something, or, one piece of technology wiped them all out and, created a, like you have these sort of waves of aggregation, disaggregation that sort of continues on and on and on. And, then the government prints a bunch of money, Wall Street gets it, then Wall Street, pumps up the value of a few companies, and then they go and buy that. And, this sort of, you end up getting this kind of weird situation where, yeah, all that interdependence is replaced by a few players. And then we have this unsovereign structure that we all sort of live within. And then, yeah, we're all sort of find ourselves wondering why, everyone sold their souls to the devil, but, it happened kind of by accident.
Yeah, but I mean, I think it just kind of revolves around, it starts off in a good place, so to speak.
Yes,
I mean,
yes,
like
yeah.
working in teams, you think about sports, right? I mean, in order to,
Mhm.
everybody kind of has their own responsibility, and the best teams are when everybody kind of knows their role and excels at that role. So, do you think that it might have been kind of come from a sense where, obviously money became really easy to come by and other things like that. But also, it came from maybe a leadership, aspect where, being a true, like strong leader, like, I think about, I don't know if you're an NBA guy, but I think about the contrast between Michael Jordan and LeBron James now, right? I mean,
Mhm, mhm.
his mindset, Michael Jordan's like Kobe Bryant. And for those listening, he's basically a killer mindset. He would just be extremely hard on his teammates. He'd yell at them. He even punched one of them in the face and kind of did all that stuff. So maybe it wasn't the best leader, but it's just kind of a hard nosed, like in your face kind of guy. And then, on the flip side, we have LeBron James, who's like the, probably the best player in the NBA right now. Obviously that can be debated. That's another show. But he's a lot more softer of a leader. He maybe blames other people. He kind of does other things like that. So he hasn't been as successful as a winner, but he's, the pinnacle top athlete. And that's where I kind of see the shift in, just leadership in general, just kind of like from a sports perspective. So do you think that that's kind of, I don't know, almost like a reflection of overall society where
Yeah,
we have like just very hard-nosed leaders, but it's been, complaints, HR departments, all that kind of stuff have kind of made people, pull back the reins a little bit when it comes to that?
definitely, man. I think leadership is fucking going down the toilet, man. Like, I still say to this day, the last great American entrepreneur was Steve Jobs. Like, after he died, like, all of Silicon Valley turned into fucking Soy Valley. Like, it was disgusting. Like, Steve Jobs would be laughing at these fuckers right now. And, like, I mean, Jack Dorsey's in there, but I don't think he ever sort of really fit in with Silicon Valley. So he's always been a bit of a wolf, or a lone wolf in that sort of environment. But totally, man, that kind of level of leadership has been lost because you have, and when I say lost, there's been a big generational gap. I think it's definitely going to come back, right? And you sort of, the environment shapes us more than we realize. And going through crap inspires us to then try not to go through crap again. And we kind of emerge through the fire as stronger leaders, and that's sort of the period we're in now. But yeah, I think that's got a huge role to play, because a leader is he who will take the tough choice when nobody else wants to, and he'll then lead the pack. Like so the book I'm writing at the moment, which I pretty much finished, and I'll publish for Bitcoin Magazine in the middle of the year, is called The Bushido of Bitcoin. And in there, like, you've got what I argue are the 11 virtues or principles that leaders of the future essentially need to adopt, in order to ensure that we don't create a new clown world just on a Bitcoin standard, right? And I think Bitcoin inherently helps with avoiding the clown world situation again, but it's not a panacea, right? Like, we could just end up with a bunch of really rich fuck Bitcoiners who become the next political parasitic class, and we don't want that. So my whole position on it is, hey, if we're going to become the socioeconomic elite, what are the virtues we must embody? Because we still need to be good people, not just have good money, right? And in there, I use a whole lot of examples from ancient and medieval leadership. A bunch of it from particularly Alexander the Great, who I think was one of the greatest leaders, if not the greatest leader who ever lived. And there was a reason why his men followed him on foot, fucking thousands of miles over deserts and mountains and snow and fucking rivers and you name it, to the ends of the earth, basically. So that kind of leadership, I don't know if we'll ever reach that kind of level again, because that is like once in a humanity sort of kind of leader. But we can be inspired by the virtues that those sorts of people extolled, and I think if we can embody a fraction of those, it ties back to what we said earlier about how do we fix the world, is we sort of fix ourselves first, and then inspire others to want to be like us.
Yeah, and I mean, I think a big downfall of that kind of leadership, or the lack thereof, is potentially like the shift in cancel culture and not wanting to be masculine men. You have to like rise up females and other things like that, and kind of encourage them. And there's kind of been I guess a shift in overall society where before, during that time, it would be, the men work, go to war and all that kind of stuff. And then the women kind of take care of everything at home. But now it's been like a shift where, especially in the States, where, women kind of, want to, I guess, excel at their career and do all those kind of things. And then, people are starting families later and other things like that. So, when it comes to that in society and kind of the degradation of that, right, we're having people live longer. But, my generation, especially, we're having people, get married later in life, have kids later in life. And, there comes potential health issues with that as well. And so, I guess from that shift and other things like that, obviously Bitcoin doesn't fix everything when it comes to that. But, what are some of the aspects with that and that mindset that you think can kind of help revert back? Obviously, it could be the number go up because, you typically see people with more money have more kids. But, what are some of the ways that I guess Bitcoiners can kind of, I guess, revert back to that, earlier principles and kind of, make that shift themselves personally, opposed to, I guess, just following the socio or the societal norms these days?
Yeah, very good question. So I think, to your point, everyone is confused as fuck right now, right? Like, people, dudes are chicks, chicks are dudes, who's the mom, who's the dad, like nobody fucking knows what's going on, right? And like, luckily though, we have seen a bit of a revival for, sort of traditional, masculine, feminine values, and the symbiosis and the complementariness, or the complementary nature of the the two energies and the gender roles and all that sort of stuff. So that sort of stuff is starting to re-emerge. I think the problem is obviously, as usual, complex. There's social components to it, but there is a specific money problem, which is a big part of why women end up in the workforce today. Is I know a lot of them that they don't necessarily want to work, but they're like, fuck man, the guy I'm with isn't looking after me. And sometimes it's not that the guy is an asshole, but, you know, one, he's either brainwashed into thinking that, you know, we should split the bill, for example, like a, you know, loser. And, you know, I say that harshly because I was one of those losers in my 20s, right? Like I was not, you know, able to, you know, look after anyone beyond myself. So it took me a while to mature, and I'm hard on that now because I wish I grew some balls a little bit earlier, right? So they're either been brainwashed into that, or they genuinely are out there working fucking full time trying to provide, but they're making 80 grand, and now the cost of living is 120. So what do you do? Like, so now both parents have to work, you know, both the husband and the wife have to work, and it's a disaster, right? So then they can never catch up, economically speaking. So then they keep pushing the baby back next year, next year, next year, next year, and then they start freaking out because they're too old or whatever. And then, you know, they, like, it's a fucking disaster, right? So I think, you know, we're probably the next 20, 30 years or whatever, 40, maybe 50 years, who knows how long it's going to take to sort of filter through this shit, but we're going to go through a rough phase, man. Like, and there's no easy way out. Like, I think the wealth gap is going to increase and increase and increase further and further and further. That's not going to get any easier anytime soon. But out the other end, we are going to have a world in which, like, you know, wealth is more not equally distributed and not evenly distributed, but more naturally distributed. And when I say naturally, I mean more like a 80-20 Pareto distribution, which is how wealth naturally should be distributed. Like, you know, there is, you know, people that are more competent than others, but an 80-20 is a hell of a lot better than a 99.99, you know, 0.001, right? And that's kind of the distribution we're heading towards. You know, we might not have that far extreme just yet, but, you know, the money printer creates that. So anyway, I think, you know, on a Bitcoin standard, we'll get to the point where, you know, the man can actually provide for him, his wife, and his family without needing to work fucking 3 jobs. And that's structurally super, super, super important. And then, you know, what ends up happening, I think, in that situation is, you know, as these incentives shift, is, you know, you're actually incentivized then to have a family and to have, you know, a wife that wants to take care of you, you know, be a homemaker, like raise the kids. You have less of an incentive then to leave your kids in some bullshit school so they can get brainwashed by some fucking hippie of a teacher. And you actually have strength in the family because, hey, you as the husband go out, work, you build something, you fucking come home, everything's taken care of. You know, you take care of your wife, you know, you fuck her, you know, you have the energy to do that. You take care of the kids fucking have a respect for you because daddy's building something. Like, all that sort of stuff starts to shift. And then, you know, the 2 worker households, the husband and the wife both working at the same time, are just working all the time and unhappy, because they're both spending time working. So the incentives begin to shift. So it actually moves back towards, you know, family orientation as opposed to this kind of, you know, men and women competing in the workplace. So anyway, that's just sort of one angle, but I think that's you know, where Bitcoin sort of plays a role is structurally and economically speaking, it, you know, brings us back to the ability that we can actually afford stuff again, and our purchasing power isn't diminished, you know, every week, every month. The way it is now. And, you know, the people who embody, you know, the right virtues and basically create a team environment within their family, they're the ones that are going to excel. And that's what's hopefully going to drive people back towards that, instead of just us telling people about it in a theoretical way. And this actually ties back into what we said before about example, right? If I'm, you know, if I've got a super functional family, we're super happy, my fucking wife's happy, she's healthy, like, you know, we're having sex all the time, you know, we look good, feel good, we've got money, and guess what? There's only one of us working, and we have this beautiful symbiosis. Like, other people are going to want to emulate that. And that's what actually changes the tide, not just telling people to do it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think like one kind of issue with all this that you didn't really point out just yet is the divorce rate and kind of the normalization of that, of just, you know, making that bond, and, you know, whether people want to say a legal binding document or in front of God or whatever, you know, your belief may be, but making that bond and then just just as easily just breaking it. I mean, it seems like that's kind of been normalized, and I think like 2/3 of the marriages in the United States now end in divorce. So it's like well over 50% or something along those lines too. So it's not only that. I think one, like you said, it is the inflationary environment that we're in, right? I mean, like coming out of college, making 40 grand or making 60 grand or whatever you're doing, one, you're probably already in student loan debt, and you're kind of encouraged to go that route and just take out debt because you'll make more money in the long term, yada yada yada, the kind of never ending cycle. And then around you, everything else gets more expensive. So not only do you get more debt throughout school, you don't make quite as much as you need to actually live. You have to either shack up with roommates or with your girlfriend or whatever, do things that you're not necessarily prepared for early on in the relationship. And then, kind of rush into marriage where it's like, hey, like, my parents don't want us to live together unless we're married. So let's do it a little sooner than possible. And they're doing this all out of need. And then that's causing, divorce rates to kind of just go up. And, obviously divorce is very expensive. The only one that really wins out of any of that is just the divorce attorneys. And so, in the state too, just kind of setting people back. So, I think, like you're saying, it's just kind of this never ending snowball cycle where debt has just grown and piled on every generation that comes next. And it's just kind of just going to keep going that way until there's some sort of, whether it's a revolution or some sort of stop or some sort of way or escape. So I think that's
like a reckoning.
Yeah, a little popularization as to why maybe some of these crypto scams and other things have been popularized, because people are just looking to find a way to make a quick buck and just find a way out of need. And so, what do you think, I guess, is the solution to, I guess, building that true, I guess, family couple, and kind of, being able to keep it together while also trying to maintain, those values, and kind of have, the man kind of take charge and make the living and kind of go through that process and be actually happy, because it seems like as a society right now, most people aren't.
Yeah, well, I mean, fuck. I love how this became a relationship advice podcast.
Yeah, I know. I don't know why I kind of turned down that rabbit hole, but it's
good.
It just kind of made me think about, it's not only, the dichotomy between men and women. It's, it all kind of ties around money at the same time, because the number one, reason for divorce is money, right? So I mean, I just kind of all reverts back to that, I guess.
Well, do you want to know a fun fact? Do you know where divorce first became legal?
No, where did it become legal? I don't know.
During the French Revolution, that was like where it first all started happening, right? Divorce was actually started to be normal. So that's why I kind of pinpoint that time as like a real sort of watershed moment for the West, because the French went from the richest, most sophisticated, and they ass fucked themselves basically, and they destroyed their own civilization through through big-brained stupidity. But yeah, I mean, to answer your question, so what can we do? I mean, fuck, this is where I think it's incumbent on men to really be, strong leaders. Is, your wife is going to shit test you all the fucking time. Like that's what women do. Like, and they do that for a biological reason, which is they need to be sure that when they're crazy, because like women are crazy 2 weeks of the month, and then awesome the other 2 weeks of the month, and that's just hormonal. They're not going to escape that. That's just how it is. So the question that they're asking when they're shit testing you is, are you going to stick around, motherfucker? Do you have a pair of balls on you? Are you grounded? Will you be there when the times get tough? Because if I'm going to have kids with you and you're just going to run away when times get tough, I don't want to have kids with you. And they don't even know that they're consciously doing that. So, women just subconsciously shit test, and they'll drive you fucking crazy. So it's incumbent on a man to basically, there's a fantastic book called The Wall Speaks, written by Jer. And, he talks about, a man's duty is to be a wall, and the wall speaks, hence the name. And, you don't get moved emotionally. You don't get shook up. You don't deviate from the course. Like you lead and you provide frame, essentially, such that a woman can actually be free within your domain or under your frame. Like if you drop frame, she has to pick it up. And if she has to pick it up, she's being the man and she begins to resent you. So this is a whole like sort of, a deep rabbit hole. But, to really tie it back to you is like the dude needs to take responsibility. He needs to lead. He needs to set the direction and the pace. And he needs to sort of bring his, woman under his wing and give her the certainty that, shit's taken care of, that he's going to provide, he's going to protect, and that it's all under control, baby, basically. Like, and, when she sort of feels that and it's authentic, and even when she feels it and it's authentic, she'll shit test you again, right? Like, and she'll do it again and she'll keep fucking with you. And you just need to be unfazed by all of that. The world's going to always throw shit at you, and it's a man's duty to sort of wade through the shit and be undeterred. And that is really hard, but this is the duty of being a man. And it's what you're going to need to do if you want to sort of bring things back in order again. And yeah, I think there's no easier answer to that other than, strap on your balls and get on with the job.
Yeah, so I mean, we've kind of been talking, back and forth. You alluded to like a little bit of this relationship podcast, but I want to tie it all back to Bitcoin as to, what, I guess gets you most excited about bringing back that personal responsibility when it comes to the money and kind of the digital, revolution that we're going through right now when it comes to Bitcoin. And yeah, I guess like what kind of, I guess, gets you jacked up and makes you want to write some of these pieces to kind of educate, what has kind of happened in society, the downfall, and kind of, where we could potentially go when it comes to Bitcoin.
You remind me of did you ever read the Remnant series of articles?
The ones that you sent me, or the
no, there was sort of, so the Remnant #1 was in 2021, and then I did like Remnant 2, Remnant 3, and then recently I did Remnant 4, which was like a comeback after about a year of being away from that series. Anyway, whether you read it or not, Remnant #4 it's a brutal article. Like I wrote it sort of in the middle of the night one night when I was in Miami. I couldn't fucking sleep and the neighbors were just making noise all night. And I was like, I'm going to kill everyone. But, I got up and I kind of like rage wrote this article in like, 20 minutes. And then I came back to it 6 months later and I kind of finished it up and published it with Bitcoin Magazine. So I think it's called like Remnant Returns or something like that. And anyway, in there, I make the argument that, Bitcoin is better not because it's going to help the starving kids in Africa, but because it's actually Bitcoin is right, and Bitcoin makes the playing field against your opponent level so that you can win a fair battle. So my point in there was that I don't care about winners and losers and fucking evil lizard people behind a curtain and all that sort of stuff. Like what I care about more is did you win because you were better, or did you win because you cheated? And if you win because you cheated, you actually fucking lost, bro. You're actually a loser, and you didn't have the balls to actually win. You didn't have the skill, you didn't have the competence, you didn't have the courage, the honor, whatever is required in order to really win. And what we've got in society today, and this is where I think Bitcoin's most important impact is going to be, is that it's going to make winning great again. Like, let's put it that way. Let's use a Trumpism, right? So like winning is about being fucking better. Like, it's because I was better than you that I won, and that's a good thing. And some people might call it elitist or whatever, but I'm sorry, like, I'm fucking better than you, so I won. And that should be the sort of the MO. And on a Bitcoin standard, you'll have a situation where it's much harder for some parasitic bureaucratic fucks to go and cheat and siphon away from the system. Because what you end up in that situation is you actually get pretty talented. So you've got the parasitic class who is out there like winning by cheating, and then that skews the system. And then you have the rest of the people basically split between the losers who just give up. They're like, fuck this, why should I play the game when I'm just going to win? When I'm just going to lose anyway. So they just give up. So you get this increasingly large loser class, basically. And then you get the people who do want to win still, and they are competent and they're smart and all that sort of stuff. They actually go and align themselves in some sort of way with the parasites. or with the cheating apparatus, right? Like that's your Jeff Bezos and your fucking Elon Musks and all that sort of stuff. And they take full advantage of the system, because why wouldn't you? If you're a fucking winner, that's what you do, right? And they just take advantage of the situation, and they get disproportionately fucking wealthy and powerful and all that sort of stuff. But they go and fucking sacrifice themselves and do it. Now, imagine if we're on a Bitcoin standard and you had that level of sort of energy and intellect and competence unleashed on the world. You'd get a far better result, because you'll have people, competing on a playing field where, you don't have these, excessive skewing of the results, right? So you'll have more people willing to compete than not. And you'll have better competitors. You'll have also people that otherwise want to not participate. So, I'm one of those people who've both participated and not participated. There's been periods where I just don't want to build a business anymore because I'm participating in a fucking Ponzi, right? I don't want to be involved in that shit. So I kind of opt out. Whereas if I know that I'm, building something of value, and I'm, not, enriching a bunch of scumbags or whatever the case is, I'll be more willing to compete. And sort of the thing changes. So anyway, without sort of going too far on a tangent there, like people, if they want to go check that article out, Remnant Returns on the Bitcoin Magazine blog. But I think Bitcoin's number one impact is going to be that it levels it out, and then we can finally go back to may the best man win, because then the best do rise up to the top. We actually get true elitism, and I have no problem with elitism. I think elitism is great. Elite to me just means what you mentioned before about Michael Jordan or someone like that. That's elite, not fucking Christine Lagarde. That's parasite. Big difference.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, it all revolves around the competition aspect, right? I mean, it's the participation culture or participation trophy culture, that kind of stuff, right? Where, the true root of capitalism is essentially just, your back's against the wall. Do you have a better product or service? Do you have a better way to get that in front of people? Do you have the, virtuity or, the mental capability to go through those trials and tribulations, all that failure? Whereas now it seems like everybody just kind of wants everything handed to them. And
well, there's a really important point here about like winners and losers. I just want to say it before I forget, is that like, in a fair game, there's actually a benefit to being a winner or a loser, right? So, a winner is a signal that you did better. And if you lost, it's a signal that you could have done something better. And it actually teaches you to go back. But in a game that's rigged, if you're the loser, the lesson is don't fucking play, because the game is rigged. And the lesson, the signal to the winner is that it's a fake winner. So there's no respect, there's just resentment. And that like, if you think of that sort of simple primitive, and you zoom out and you look at the world, you understand why people resent, the rich. You understand why there's such a, willingness and a nihilism, willingness to give up and a nihilism. Like, all of that sort of shit starts to make sense. And I think just for our fucking souls and our minds and our hearts and our fucking future, like we need to be playing a fair game. And that's sort of missing in the world today. So anyway, I just wanted to say that about winners and losers, because people might be like, oh yeah, this guy's all about winning. It's like, no, sorry, like sometimes you're gonna fucking lose, but there's so much. Like, I have lost so much in my life, but each time I've lost, I've had an opportunity to learn something about myself, and I come back better, I come back stronger. And there's a purpose to loss, and the outcome of the loss can't be, oh, I lost because someone cheated. Like, that's really fucking bad.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's exactly what you're saying there, is like the outcome of the loss is not just because somebody cheated, but because, you are the benefit of losing. I'm sorry, excuse me, where you can really just take yourself, look at yourself in the mirror, figure out why you lost, and just do better next time. So I think that's my biggest takeaway from all that. And I agree with you 100%. I think, those athletes, like I said, Michael Jordan and all that, he's claimed, like, one of his famous quotes is he's missed, a million shots. He's, lost a ton of games, but at the end, that's the reason why he's a winner, is because he can kind of take himself and look at those losses and really learn from them. So, but totally. You've been very generous with your time, and I know you got to run here. So I'm going to let you, why don't you tell the audience where they can find you and what you got going on?
For sure. So if people are on Twitter, then Svetski writes. If they're seeing this video, they'll see my handle on there. Writes like writing, WRITES. Or just go to svetsky.info, and that should take you to my link tree. And you'll see all the links there. And if people want to support, like, check out the Uncommunist manifesto that's on Amazon. And then ideally, there's a really cool publication that I run on an annual basis called the Bitcoin Times, and that's got some sick fucking authors in it. Like each year I do one, and it has the best authors in it. So I got Michael Goldstein out of hibernation for last year's edition, for the Austrian edition. So it's him, Pierre, Seyfedin, Conrad Graf, and Rahim Tagizadagan. And these are essays that you won't find anywhere else. And I print them as a collectible. So there's 2,100 of each ever printed. And each issue number is each issue is numbered on the back. So anyway, that's a really cool project, bitcointimes.io, if they want to go and check that out. And yeah, I really, really appreciate having me on, man.
Of course. So yeah, I'll link all those stuff in the show notes as well. So be sure to check it out and give him a follow. And Aleks, thanks so much for coming on, man.
Appreciate it, brother. Thank you.